Do the microbes that grow on your skin cause you to age? Or do they cause you not to age? That is the question we'll be addressing today, so stay tuned. This is the Skin Science Podcast. I'm Dr. Thomas Hitchcock, and here we'll investigate everything skin science and dissect it from a scientific perspective, analyze it from a medical perspective, critique it from a consumer perspective, and give insight from an industry perspective. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Skin Science Podcast. I am Dr. Thomas Hitchcock, and with me in the studio today, we have the lovely, effervescent even, Angela McDonald.
Thank you, Thomas. What an introduction.
Yeah.
Glad to be here.
Well, you don't believe me, do you?
No.
You think I want something, don't you?
Yes, for sure.
But anyway, how are you doing, Angela?
I'm doing great.
Yeah. A lot going on today?
Yeah.
Mother's Day was yesterday?
Monday afternoon. It was a great Mother's Day.
Yeah.
Yes. I bought lunch so my kids could celebrate me. Works out well. They eat like kings and, you know.
Isn't that what Mother's Day is all about?
That's right.
Taking care of
That's
kids.
right.
So it should be Kids Day.
Exactly.
But anyway, we also have special guest. I was going to say guest judge, but we're not judging anything.
I can be
Special guest, Dr. Jigna Patel. How are you, Dr. Patel?
I'm fine. Thank you very much for having me.
All right. And Dr. Patel is visiting us from London, England.
Yes.
And she has family here in McKinney. And if you were with us on our last episodes, you'll know that she has got her doctorate from King's. I'm trying to do it by memory.
That's
King's
all right.
College in London.
Yep.
All right. And she basically follows or ascribes to a holistic philosophy of caring for skin as well as the entire body, what we call holobiontology. And so today she's with us here to discuss something that has to do with something I'm very passionate about, which is the skin microbiome and where the correlations and associations lie with skin aging. And is there something that is there, whether we can inhibit aging or, stop acceleration of aging based on how we deal with the skin microbiome? So before we get started, as always, science is a puzzle, and that's why I really like puzzles. And this one is called the Bolt Bot. This is a 3D printed puzzle. It's all plastic with some magnets and stuff sprinkled in there. This is really cheap, but I haven't figured it out yet, which is very interesting because this is like 10 times cheaper than a lot of the puzzles that I can solve very quickly. So either it's broken or I haven't solved it yet, which is probably the latter. But anyway, this is by a guy named Ryan Sinatra. There you go. That's today's puzzle. And so also I want to show something that Dr. Patel brought me from England. And this is a candy called Marvelous Creations, not a sponsorship. So unless you guys want to pay me money for saying this, but Cadbury makes great chocolate. And I don't endorse eating a lot of sweets because refined sugars are not great for the holobiont, but it's all about balance, right? So it's about moderation.
Moderation.
I
Balance.
guess I need that. I guess that word is in my vocabulary. Moderation.
You need to eat some of that.
So you're just going to eat one square at a time.
Not right now, though. But this is the reason why this is great is because you can't find this in the United States. I actually stumbled upon this when I first went to Australia, and it's about as candy as you can get. Not only is there chocolate, there's jelly beans, there's like what do you call them, like M&M type things, and Pop Rocks. I mean, it's probably not great for you, but it's great to make you feel better for a short time, I guess. So
it came on prescriptions.
Yes, came on prescription. So I got 2 doses of Marvelous Creations, and then that's going to be it because that'll be my yearly allocation.
Absolutely.
One of them will probably go in the freezer so I can ration it out. But today we're going to be talking about aging. Oh, before we get on, I do want to mention that in the peanut gallery today we have Dr. Abigail Watterson, and she just told me she is not related to Bill Watterson, which is a shame because he's a hero of mine. And then we have Seti and Alan, the producers. How are you guys doing?
Great.
Really?
Yeah.
And they're looking fabulous. Have you noticed how good they look on camera?
Well, they've always looked fabulous.
My good shirt.
It's the shirt. It's the shirt, Alan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't know if any of you guys know, but Alan is he's not just a producer of podcasts. He's a full-blown filmmaker. He's an Emmy award-winning documentarian.
Well done.
And he just produced, was one of the producers on a film with Jeremy Piven called The Performer. The Performance. which I have not seen, so I cannot endorse it, but it looks like it's going to be pretty good. I keep asking if I can see it, and he has not allowed me to yet. So soon? All right, soon. You heard it here, folks. But I don't know if I'll see it before you guys and the internet see it. So if I do, I'll tell you. I'll give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down. But of course, it's going to be a thumbs up. So.
That's good.
All right, so the topic of the day is aging and the skin microbiome. And so we thought with Dr. Patel in the office today, because she and I have a very similar philosophy on things related to this. And so I thought we would we got a bunch of publications that Dr. Watterson and the Peanut Gallery printed out for us. And there's a lot of information on this. It's actually interesting how much information is available that looks at this. Now, the real question that we're going to discuss today is there's really no conclusion per se, but it's a very interesting question to ask. Can we mitigate aging via modulation of the skin microbiome, which is part of the larger skin biome in general? And so, Angela, all of that, what does that mean to you?
What does that mean to me? You know, it makes me think of the gut, quite honestly. It makes me think of what we've been doing for years with the gut in terms of leveraging or balancing the skin microbe, the gut microbiome to improve intestinal health and overall health.
Do you think it's led to less aging?
Oh, I do. But I grew up in the pharmaceutical world, and in particular in the early days in the cardiovascular world. And that's when you started hearing, if you're working in the hypertension or high cholesterol markets, you started hearing about inflammation being the enemy. So That's been something that's just been ingrained in me for years. It's something that I think of even as a consumer every day. I think about what I'm putting in my body and what I'm doing to my body and stress, and how I could be increasing the inflammation in my own body and how that could be affecting me. So certainly for the skin, we know that about the skin, but yes, for the body as a whole as well.
Yeah, interesting you bring up. We've talked about in the past how the gut microbiome, and I know we've talked about it with the gut, skin, brain axis, and but in the gut, this certain microbes can highly influence disease states, whether they progress or don't progress. Interestingly, when we were still in La Jolla, this was before the Skin Science podcast was even a thought, but when we were back in La Jolla, this is probably, 2024? This is probably 7 or 8 years ago. A scientist from India actually came over and wanted us to take on his finding, which was that he had a consortium of lactobacillus that when ingested in the gut, he was claiming, and he had data to back it up, that it actually reduced cholesterol, the harmful cholesterol, better than any statin on the market. And I was fascinated, but at the time we had so little money to do other things, and we were skin centric, and we had to just do our project that our investors wanted us to get. I just couldn't deviate from it. I don't know what happened to him. I do know that it was very compelling because it does speak to the fact that these were not modified at all. These were just a consortium of native gut-relevant microbes that actually secreted certain enzymes that allowed the body not to absorb or to digest properly certain types of lipids that actually led to reduction in harmful cholesterols, lipids and cholesterols. And so that being said, it does not surprise me that similar things happen on the skin. Now, when we're young and vibrant, we don't really have issues with cholesterol. Like, you don't hear many teenagers that they're like, damn, I got high cholesterol. I need to go on Lipitor. You don't really hear a lot of that.
I spend my time taking people off drugs, but yeah. Yeah, you don't actually, unless it's a genetic.
Yeah, unless it's a genetic,
no,
which there is some genetics that plays into cholesterol. But it's the same with you don't hear very many young people saying, I got to be on an ARB. Or a beta blocker. Now, yes, there are some diseases that they put those people on those for different reasons, but it's typically associated as we age, we tend to get more comorbidities. Like we get diabetes is more prevalent when we age. It's not to say that young people never get diabetes. We know they do, but there's diabetes, you got eyesight problems, you have gut problems, you have mind problems, all these things as we age. And the real question is, why do we get those issues? And then we start to have to take a look back at biology and say, okay, well, what's different between a young person's biology and an older person's biology? And traditionally, we just look at the actual human biology. But now we're starting to look at the holobiont, which is now looking at, well, are there associations between the microbiomes of these individuals when they're young and they're old, and when there's certain disease states? Now, in other podcasts, even the last one that we just did, we talked about how people with atopic dermatitis can have associations with different microbiota than people that don't have atopic dermatitis. And there's this dysbiosis that can lead to a disease state. And so the big kind of debate on all of this type of thing, these types of discussions, is causation versus correlation. So basically, is the presence or absence of a microbe actually causing a disease state, or causing the absence of a disease state, or is it just correlated with? So for instance, does the disease state just make it to where it's more conducive to those microbes to be there? And so that's the big question, because that tells us whether or not by adding or subtracting microbes, we can actually modulate disease states. So the one that we're talking about today is aging. And I tend to refer to aging as a disease state, although it's a natural thing that we all go through, because in essence, I believe that there is the hallmarks of disease, because aging is when the body does not function as genetically intended. Mm-hmm. So as we age, genetically, some of the functions stop happening that we're programmed to do. Now, it's a very broad discussion that includes epigenetics and all this stuff. But today, we're just going to talk about the microbiota of the skin and the association with aging, and whether or not there's causation or correlation, and what we can do about it. So, Jigna, what are your thoughts on the matter? Have you given it any thought? I'm sure you have.
Yes, I have, yes.
What are your thoughts on the topic? And let's start there.
Okay. So I think if we're going to look at it from an aesthetic medicine angle, a lot of us are focused on the external features. Mm-hmm. So we'll classify someone as being aged, fine lines and wrinkles, pigmentation issues. It will also be accelerated by lots of factors like diet, smoking, alcohol consumption, pollution, and what impact we can visibly see when it comes to aging. I think that's across the board, everyone's quite comfortable with that. But my interest, which is evolving, is looking at what happens inside and looking at how things are at a cellular level. And it's interesting, I know obviously we're talking about dysbiosis, but it's one of your 12 hallmarks of aging. It's been recently added, so it is as important as every other hallmark of aging. So that for me instantly was like, right, okay, we're dealing with a big biomarker essentially in terms of how we age. And we have to think about what's happening histologically. Obviously, we have reduction in lipids, reduction in collagen production, we have epidermal thinning, loss of fat, so everything starts to move and migrate. But ultimately, I'm now being put in a position where I want to get to cellular root cause. What is actually instigating the whole process of aging? And through, I guess, now doing a lot of work in the last 2 years, it's so complicated.
It is.
Wowza, it is so complicated where one can have an impact on another and then it has an impact on another. So if we're thinking now about dysbiosis, which wasn't even on the radar 3 years ago, it wasn't even on the radar.
For aging, you mean?
Yeah, it wasn't. Then there must be relevance, and it must be a concept which has a knock-on effect on other things. So immune system.
Right.
And then what the impact on the immune system has on the functioning of cells. How do we get to a point where we can age healthily, perhaps get to a point where we can control that aging process? Yes, we can reverse it, but there's a long way to go with that. Mm-hmm. But we're in a position where if we're going to deal with the skin microbiome and gut microbiome, we can put ourselves into a favorable position now where we can influence how quickly we get there, which I think is something new. It's fresh. And I think if we don't take that into consideration, we're missing the boat completely. I think a lot of us focus on cell senescence. We'll look at mitochondrial dysfunction, and they're big indicators, but it's never just a one track. It's never just a one hallmark. And this is where a lot of practitioners will fail because they will go with a kind of a unidirectional approach. But actually, we're so complicated, and that's how we get to this whole brain, gut, skin axis. If we're going to deal with a whole patient, I read people externally. I can see the aging process beyond what people can typically see. And it does force you to pick apart all of these little bits instead of sticking on a Band-Aid.
Right. Band-Aid is a great word for you to finish that thought on, because that is exactly what a lot of aesthetic medicine, I believe, is.
Yeah.
And it's not that that's necessarily a bad thing in and of itself, but when that's all you're doing, then eventually you can only put in so many Band-Aids on before you start looking weird.
Clinical medicine too.
That's true. That's true. So I was doing my postdoctorate work in tissue engineering. And while that is fascinating, that's why I fell out of love with it and went on to do other things like gene therapy and then now microbiome research and such. Because what I found was that we were actually doing some super brilliant, I mean, not just me, so I'm not just saying I'm brilliant, but we were doing some brilliant work. And of course, in London, brilliant means very differently than the United States.
Yes.
So I mean in the London sense.
Yeah.
But we were doing some great work where we actually were taking like saphenous vein smooth muscle cells from like really old patients. And these are patients that are like 80 years old, 70s, 80s, where when you try to culture their cells, you don't get a lot because there's not a lot of Hayflick limit left. Mm-hmm. And so it's very difficult so what we would do is we'd put gene therapy using telomerase and other things, and it's all published if you want to look it up. Just it's one of the publications with my name on it. But you can see we actually were able to turn these older cells into cells that acted as if they were like 30-year-old cells. And then we would put them on a matrix and grow them into blood vessels and implant them into animals to see whether or not they could actually function as blood vessels. And I thought, I was super excited. I actually got my PI's like, you're the first person you can use this as one of your laurels to put a small diameter blood vessel into an animal and have them survive. And I was like, that's fantastic, yay for me. But then I started thinking through the process of, because what her company was doing was decellularizing blood vessels and implanting them into people that had needed bypasses or whatever. And I thought to myself, well, if you put a organ that is functioning properly into a diseased system, it will eventually become diseased.
Yes.
So it's basically you're just replacing
buying time.
something, buying time. It's a sophisticated Band-Aid.
Yeah.
The real thought is, how do you reverse the systemic issue? That's the real key.
Right.
Because if you're going to solve something as big as cardiovascular disease, you can't just replace a heart. You can't replace a lung. You have to replace the systemic disease state. Otherwise, it's just going to catch up with you eventually.
Correct.
And so it's the same with aging, is that you can get a facelift, but you did not correct anything systemically by pulling skin. You might appear younger because you've chopped off some of the tissue that it was a hallmark of aging, but you didn't do anything to reverse the aging.
No.
You put a Band-Aid on there. And it's also similar for things like using a lot of CO2 laser surfacing and stuff, is you're going to get tighter skin, but you're putting a lot of scar tissue there. It's the same with RF microneedling. You're going to get some tightening and lifting, but you're putting scar tissue. You're sacrificing actual physiological signs of youthfulness and putting scar tissue, and eventually that's going to accumulate. You can only do so much before it all adds up. And we all have seen in our industry where there's somebody who's added a few too many things. Mm-hmm. And then you're like, it no longer looks youthful. It looks artificial now. And that is where, when it comes to this, we really are starting just at the very beginning to unlock some of the secrets of how we might actually truly reverse some of these aging processes. Now, some of it can happen through just diet and exercise.
Correct.
And that one thing I don't want to say is I'm not trying to shame age, because age is a natural process. We should age gracefully, et cetera. But what I'm trying to say is that a lot of times, we're oversimplifying. Like you said, it's not simple.
It's not at all.
And just looking at DNA methylation of your blood does not mean that you've reversed the accumulation of age over the years. So you can level set to where your body is now aging better, but that doesn't mean you've reversed all the damage that has accumulated over the years, which can we get to someday? Possibly. And that's where we talk about senolytics and such.
Yeah.
But let's focus on the microbiomes association with age. And so, are you prepared to talk about that?
Sure.
Okay, so what is your understanding about the association of the microbiome on the skin with aging?
Well, I think of inflammation as prematurely aging the skin, and so what I know from just what we do every day is that by leveraging healthy, beneficial bacteria on the skin and changing that balance of good to bad bacteria, you can reduce inflammation in the skin. So that's what I think of, first of all. And I think of, just the healthy substances that beneficial bacteria release, and the fact that they're in the skin, not just on the skin, and that the opportunity that can bring you. And I think, that's basically it.
So that is, as expected, a very commercial perspective.
Well, that's what I am.
Yeah, that's what you are. Well, you're more than that.
And a consumer.
Yeah, you're a consumer, and you're also very much in the industry, and so you look at things from that perspective as well.
Right.
But from a scientific perspective, like for instance, you did very well from a consumer perspective, the good and the bad, which anybody who knows me knows I don't like to use those terms when it comes to the microbes on the skin. And so what is your take on aging and the skin microbiota?
Well, I think I guess we'll come back to this good and bad, because even I started saying that, right? It's actually understanding that you have your beneficial commensals. They're doing their respective jobs, they're giving off signals, they're protecting themselves with antioxidants, they're influencing our immune system. So coming back to inflammation, all inflammation's not bad, but in the disease states and in the way that our society is at the moment, we are swinging into a pro-inflammatory position based on diet, lifestyle, underlying genetics, etc. So by having commensal bacteria influence our immune system in a positive way, that for me indicates that, well, if we're able to suppress bad inflammation and level out with good inflammation, then we can influence our aging process. Mm-hmm. But then also it's about keeping in check the pathogens, right? So in disease states or with aging, we tend to see people with more skin infections. We tend to see them being exposed to not the bad bacteria, but the pathogenic strains, which then, is that for a reason? Surely that is, because as you're probably going to say now.
Let's talk about, before you go on, let's talk about the term pathogenic. So, and that goes to the good and the bad thing. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that a little bit. So why is it that you think that we see this higher prevalence of infections and such as we age? How's that correlated to the skin microbiota? And does it truly speak to a pathogenic strain or to a lack of a balance?
The latter. So if we're too busy trying to get rid of our commensals in the way that our industry has taught us, we're throwing off that balance. My understanding is we're allowing certain other species to take precedence and to become dominant. Would that be fair to say?
I would, yeah.
So if we haven't got this check process, we're allowing certain strains which wouldn't be our usual commensals to take precedence and then have perhaps a pro-inflammatory effect, cause the skin to desquamate, cause us to age, cause us to increase our susceptibility to infections. So for me, it's all about the balance.
Right.
And now I've retracted when I say good and bad, because I understand microbes are all going to be there. It's about which one is going to be predominant or which species are going to be predominant. And are we in a position where all this time we have been actively involved in throwing that balance off? That's the way I'm thinking about this now. And
you're correct. I think there are microbes that are truly pathogenic, like Ebola.
Yes, well.
But the thing is, there are some that are pathogenic that are only pathogenic if your immune system is depressed, or so for instance, flesh-eating strains of either bacteria or fungus don't necessarily make people sick because it falls on them or gets on them. It's usually something that allows it to get into enough of a foothold to where it then causes that infection. It's the same with what you talked about with as we age, we get more skin infections. Well, in these publications, there's several publications that talk about the reduction of certain species and the not upregulation, what's the word?
Dominance?
Dominance, I guess. More dominance of other species. And so, for instance, in the situation you're talking about, we know, and some of these publications here, and these are all publications that are not our publications. None of us in this room are on these publications, and so this is completely independent research. But there's pretty much consensus across the board that there tends to be a reduction in the Cutibacterium species on the skin. There also seems to be slight reductions of Staphylococcus epidermidis, and those are two of the more prevalent, here you go, skin commensals, as we called them. Now, that being said, when you look at the disease state of where you would get like a staph infection, there tends to be an association with things like atopic dermatitis and staph infections with a depression in the C. acnes because it helps to balance each other out. They all balance each other out. And that's not today's topic. We'll maybe another day talk about the web of interactions that occur between all these species and strains even of these species. But to put it very simplistic, to put it very simple, I always refer back to Yellowstone National Park because, especially in the United States, people are very familiar with it. I think there was even a TV show recently. I don't know if it dealt with this particular subject. I should probably watch it. But they basically got rid of the wolves because they want to keep their livestock healthy. And then the elk population exploded and just destroyed the park. Would we say that elk are pathogenic in this scenario? No. It was that they were in balance by the wolves. Well, we call the wolves pathogenic. I mean, we look at them and probably most people would say, yeah, wolves are bad because they can kill you. But the thing is, they're only bad when they're out of balance. When there's too many wolves, yeah, they're probably going to not have enough food, and then they'll come after humans and stuff. But the thing is, when everything's in balance, the wolves are going to go after their main food sources, which are the elk or whatnot. The elk are going to eat the leaves, and then, so there's going to be the balance there. And our skin is not that different. It's an ecosystem the same way. So it's the same idea as that even MRSA doesn't necessarily cause a staph infection. Because you can swab somebody's skin and see they have MRSA on them and they're completely healthy. We call some of these things opportunistic pathogens like C. diff in our guts. And I happen to have both of those things at the same time when I had a depressed immune system and pneumonia. And so the thing is, there are things that are part of our inherent skin biome, body's biome, that are there that they may serve a purpose. We may not know what that purpose is yet. But remember, even genetics, that used to call certain sequences junk DNA. And then it turns out that they're not junk after all. We just didn't know what they were. And that happens a lot in medicine. And so that's where that's why I don't like people to call them good for commercial purposes.
Right.
It makes sense because
for consumer purposes.
Yeah. Because they
don't understand the word commensal.
I mean, once you say commensal, maybe. Then they gloss over and they're like, I'm just going to buy Cetaphil or something.
Exactly.
So, but for, talking to physicians and to people that are interested in skin science, it's a nuance that is very important that we don't get into the reductiveness of commercial activities. It's necessary to be more reductive in commercial activities because you have like a moment to get somebody in your boat.
100%.
But
100%.
When it comes to how we are forwarding medicine and science, we cannot fall into that. Easy is not going to get us moving forward in science and medicine. Usually it's the hard things that actually become innovation.
So how do you balance that as a clinician, though, Dr. Patel? Because you called yourself a scientist, but yet you have the task of you've got a patient in front of you and you've got to communicate on their level the direction you're going and why and what they can expect from this. How do you balance the two?
It's really hard, actually.
It's got to be hard.
It's really hard. And I think almost on on a daily basis, I'm put in positions, part of my life's in medicine, where I'm thinking, what am I doing to them? Seriously, with antibiotic use, typical example.
What long-term effect am I having on them?
Yes. Do I really need to use one? Am I just empirically using one? Because there's the empirical scenario where they're at increased risk of this, therefore oh, we'll just give them this.
They fall in
Band-Aid.
slot A, B, or C.
Right.
Potentially just a Band-Aid, right? I mean, it
Not
makes me
even a
feel,
Band-Aid.
feel better.
Well, oral antibiotic use, now we know, completely wiping
Yeah.
gut and skin microbiomes to an extent. But there's a whole other category of drugs doing the same thing in terms of absorption of B vitamins, for example, and then affecting mitochondria. So I really had to step back and think, is something absolutely necessary? Now that I understand that we are so complex internally, and now that I have supportive information that dysbiosis is a hallmark of aging, I really do stand back and say, is the action I'm going to take throw off what's supposed to live on the surface of the skin? I actually verbalize that to patients, and they seem to connect with that and resonate with that. And then when I say, well, actually, we can show that we can harness the benefits of balancing by reintroducing the good back in, or the commensals if it's
So I'm going to
clinical.
take this action, but I do have something that can counteract that in some respect. Is that the thought process?
Well,
I will probably paint both scenarios because counteracting is probably
Not the right word,
Not the right
but,
word. I think it will come to me what the right word is.
yeah.
But I do now that we have this information, I can be quite clear and stop myself from just blindly sometimes, and we do, prescribing something.
Yeah.
Step back and say, actually, we know that part of the reasons why we age does involve messing around with our microbiome balance, just to keep it simple. How do we mess around with that? Well, actually, it's because we've been using X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. Do we need to use X, Y, and Z? Yes, maybe, maybe not. And so that's how I kind of try and sit and have those conversations, because it gets patients thinking about what I'm doing to them, what I know we have as a tool to help make our microbiome more symbiotic, I suppose. And I guess, like you say, right, we're at just the tip of what's happening here. There's so much more that we don't even know yet. And we might even completely, I'm not going to say this is probably going to happen, but I probably see a lot of us step away from prescribing as time goes on, because we're trying to nurture and balance what should have been there to begin with. So it's really tricky.
Yeah.
I do find myself questioning my training.
Yeah, and I do think also we need to keep in mind that aging is an accumulative thing.
Yeah.
So it's not something that one day you're 30 and the next day you're 70, right? It's that your habits affect how you age. So if you go out in the sun too much without protection, if you eat a lot of sugars, if you drink a lot of alcohol, these and of themselves are not bad things. But when, like the chocolate bar here, when done in moderation is very different than done consistently.
Correct.
And it's one of the things we actually talk about even the other day with microneedling, is that I've always taught people that you should probably give your skin a break after quite a bit of microneedling, because after a while your body becomes accustomed to things and you don't get the benefits. Your body doesn't react the same way to something that chronically is occurring. And you mentioned inflammation. There's actually a strong association between the way the body sees inflammation and cancers. And so, when you talk about you need some inflammation, a lot of people don't define inflammation the same way. Inflammation we think of as a bad thing, where it's like you're red, you're swelling, whatever, But inflammation is really just the body calling in the immune cells to deal with things. And as we age, for some reason, our body loses the way of regulating you shouldn't be here and you should be here. Mm-hmm. And so cells senescent cells start to accumulate because our immune system basically goes into quiescence when it shouldn't. Interestingly, it goes crazy for other things and causes inflammation in other places where it shouldn't. And so it's a dysregulation of the immune system, but also it goes back to, like with the microbiota, how the body recognizes that. So we do know there's association with changes. There's a paper here that we looked at that actually looks at quite a few studies, and when you look at the diversity indexes, which is, I guess you could say simplistically, the number of different types of microbes on the skin. So as you have a higher index, you have more diversity. Lower index, you have lower diversity. And they showed that there's some overall. It looks like there's a more rich diversity as we age, and in the gut they look at that as healthy. And so people have said, well, on the skin, and then you want more diversity. But in essence, would you say that aged skin is healthier skin? Most people wouldn't say that. They'd say that younger skin is healthier. So then that means that less diversity. And now that's also reductive, because when I say less diversity, it doesn't mean blanket. You could have any microbes there as long as it's less diverse. And that's the problem, is that there's actually a lot of companies out there that are trying to sell like certain things like lactobacillus, saying you need more diversity on the skin, right? Because it's equated with the gut health, which if you ate the lactobacillus, maybe that might help. But on the skin, again, there's very little data that points us in the direction that just adding any old bacteria to cause more diversity is going to actually equate to better skin health. And it definitely doesn't point to that it would actually equate to younger skin. So the real question is, okay, well, if less diversity is associated with younger skin, what's on older skin that I don't want, or what's missing? Because the funny thing is that although there's more diversity on older skin, there's certain key elements that are reduced, which kind of sounds like antithetical, but it's not. It's just that you have a pie chart, right, of all the different species. To get more species in there, you're going to have to reduce some species. And so what we have found, one of the things, the premises that my research and the company's research has gone to, is that the species of C. acnes is vastly reduced as aging occurs. And the question is, can we see whether or not by replenishing that, a good strain of that species, we can actually reverse aging? So the real question is, just by putting the microbe there, what's that going to do? It's going to have some sort of physiological change, because the skin, it's not just like the presence that de-ages skin or ages skin, or absence that ages skin. It's physiological processes. So is it SPF that it adds? Is it like, the antioxidants that produces that help to reduce the signs of aging? Or is it the activation of the AHR receptor or the retinoid receptors? Or what is it that's happening? If anything at all. Is there
all of it and more.
Maybe, because it's not that simple, like you said. Everybody wants to say it's one thing.
Yeah.
You don't have enough retinoids. But can it be that simple?
No.
No. Aging is not simple. It's an accumulation, and when you think about how does the accumulation of damage occur, it's not a simple thing. There's a lot of properties of the microbiome and the human physiology as well that change over time. The real question is, what is that change, and can we reverse that change by simply applying a microbe? And I'd like to hear, we got a couple minutes left, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Is that possible? And what do we have to answer in order for us to know if it's possible?
Well, I think to make this straightforward, we have to not confuse gut and skin microbiome together, which is, I think, what we're starting to see in terms of papers. And I know we've talked about lactobacilli, but people think if you have a more diverse gut, therefore that equals health. Yes, to an extent, although there's a paper there that says otherwise.
There always is.
Right? But that's really important to think about, because, again, that's going down, making a beeline.
Clarify that.
Yeah, so this is a paper that looks at genetic insights into the gut microbiota, and it specifically looks at strains that have been either positively or negatively associated with facial aging. And what was interesting, because I picked your brain on this, is that, yes, we are all pro lactobacilli and bifidobacterium to increase diversity in the gut equals healthier gut equals, therefore, healthier skin. Mm-hmm. But then actually, when you dig a bit deeper, some of the studies are not matching up with that.
That's right.
And actually, what's really interesting here is that there are studies that are looking at specific disease states. So people can have autoimmune conditions, for instance, which is what this is referring to. And that actually, by having more lactobacilli
in the gut
can add to the problem. So we've got polar opposites. And I think that in itself is a problem, because people might sit there and think, well, actually, no, it can't have a negative association. Who says it can't have a negative association? Maybe there's more to it than just throwing lots and lots of one or two strains in the gut. So
and
I
remember,
found this was
it's
really
strain specific,
Yeah.
and that's what most people forget, is that you can't just say a whole species does the exact same thing.
No.
It's like saying a Chihuahua and a Great Dane are the same, and that they're the same as a wolf. They're all the same species. With this, like we talked about early in this episode, about there's certain lactobacillus species that can lower cholesterol. that doesn't mean that necessarily they actually won't contribute to aging. So it's all one of those things where you cannot be overly simplistic. And the great thing about that paper, and Abigail, if you can make sure that these papers the citations are in the notes for the people who are listening and watching. But the great thing about that paper is that they are conscious of this disagreement with.
And this is this year.
Yeah. But they say in the paper that they know that other people have said the opposite.
Yeah.
And that they're saying, look, we throw our hands up not because we're giving up, but we're saying this needs to be looked at.
Well, it says complex role.
Yeah. This needs to be looked
and
at.
that we need to know more. And then maybe perhaps in 5 years, we might not even be using these as supplements or
maybe we'll be regulating it better.
Yeah.
Because frankly, I hate that we walk into a store and there's dozens of things to buy, and how are we supposed to know which ones are BS and which ones are legitimate? Because they all say they're backed by science. Same with topicals. Everything's backed by science. Can that be true for everything? Absolutely not. Because there's some very snake oily stuff out there in probiotics as well as topicals. Mm-hmm. And so it comes down to evidence. What evidence is there? And that's really where, for the layperson, it's a tough. It's a tough market.
So then you don't rely on evidence. You lean to marketing,
which is dangerous.
It's whatever.
But that's why
there's studies of the brain that says when you look at this label of this chocolate and you see the purple and you see the popping candy and they're measuring like the brain activity
it's
in
dopamine
that case
as well.
Oh, sure.
The addiction properties with certain things which I've put in front of you. But it's so convoluted, and I think when marketing takes over, everything gets lost. And I think
how does a clinician?
Well, it takes a bit of curiosity, I think, and intelligence.
Overcome that,
Because at some point, you start questioning what's been told because there's just too much, there's way too much information. Now we know that some of it's contradictory and people are admitting that we need to do more and learn more and actually decipher, is that actually exactly what it's meant to be doing? And you could say the same for dealing with the skin surface. And I think when people hop on and ride on the concept of how we increase gut health and then just literally copy and paste it to skin, this is the biggest issue we're going to see. And I've been saying this.
Right.
I've been observing what's happening so far with the brands that are coming out. And it's interesting because we need to know about them. We need to know the angle that they're taking so that the job really is to re-educate and say, well, actually, do you understand that the skin has a similar function, but it has its own environment and it works in its own way? You can't replicate one and put it in another. And I think that's where we're going to be at. We're going to be seriously having to undo a lot of that to progress.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think the thing that we'll end this episode on is that we have to ask the questions. We have to be willing to ask the questions. We have to be willing to poke holes. That paper is great because they basically say, look, we need to revisit this now. Mm-hmm. And we can't be scared to revisit something that we thought was true. Because if we do that, then science and medicine stop progressing.
Yep.
We have to be willing to say we now have more evidence to point us in a better direction. If we can do that, we're going to have better ways to treat people. The problem is we cannot be afraid to stir the pot a little bit when it comes to this, not in a troublemaking way, but in a way to say everybody that is involved in the creation of products and medicines and services and treatments should be always asking themselves whether what they're doing, like you said, with the way that you are dealing with the way you treat your patients, is, am I treating them correctly based on what I know now?
Yep.
Do I feel uncomfortable now using antibiotics the way I used to? And do I have justification for changing my way of using this tool? That is something that we absolutely must covet in medicine and science and in all disciplines. Otherwise, we go nowhere or backwards even. So I think that papers like that are super important. And that really comes down to the conclusion here, which is we don't know everything about how we can mitigate aging via the microbiota. We know there are associations. We know that there's evidence that certain strains do things that could mitigate some of the aging process. And we have clinical data that shows that might be true. Now, whether or not it's whether or not there's more data to be had, absolutely. And in the years to come, I'm hoping that more and more scientists and clinicians actually keep asking the questions and getting the data so that we can move this forward. So bring that to a close.
Okay.
And Dr. Patel, if anybody wants to stalk you, where can they find you?
You can find me on Instagram. I'm at Vedaskin Clinic, and yes, I'm just on Instagram.
Okay.
And where are you in London? Let's talk about where your clinic is.
All right. So I'm in.
But don't stalk her in person.
Well, no, don't do that. I'll stalk you back. So I'm in Essex, which is northeast, sort of bordering out, sort of outer London. It is notorious for challenging aesthetics, should I say. There is also a big focus on health. And there is this whole confusion kicking in as to, are we doing too much? Are we not doing enough? And I actually love that. I love the challenge. A lot of people, when they come to London, should come and visit Essex because it is its own world.
Isn't there a show called The Only Way is Essex?
Yes.
I don't know what it's about.
All right. So if you watch that, you'll get an idea of just how shockingly bad aesthetics is.
Okay, maybe I should watch it then. I haven't seen it.
We should watch that.
Angela, where can they find you?
Instagram at Angela Wilson McDonald.
Would you promise that by the
Post
time
number
this
4?
airs, you're going to post something?
I can do it. I can do that.
Well, we can post a selfie from today.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right.
Behind-the-scenes video, right?
All right. And well, if you want to find me, you can find me at dr.t.hitchcock on Instagram, or you can look at crownaesthetics.com if you want to look at us there. Anyway, I do want to acknowledge the producers in the Peanut Gallery. Thank you guys for being here today. Thank you for all your work. And thank you for your time and attention. And we hope you gleaned something from this conversation. And we will see you next time. Goodbye for now.